Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from the studios in Plymouth, England. And with me in the studio today I've got Mike Robinson. We're going to be covering some key parts of the news and putting focus on parts of the news that the mainstream media doesn't do. And we'll be having a particular emphasis in the show today with looking at economic matters and what's happening in the financial world. First of all, I'd like to just start with a story which I've taken from the Mail, and it's about actions being taken by the new socialist government in France to take on the gypsies. And the headline here, France declares war on illegal migrants. And I find it fascinating the actual rhetoric that's being used by the Mail. We're talking about war, we're talking about roundups, we're talking about taking on the gypsies, and the story details the fact that gypsy communities both around Lyon and Lille and Marseille are being rounded up and large numbers of gypsies deported. And this story emphasises, of course, at the moment that as the economic situation in Europe worsens, we are starting to see European governments moving to hardline policies. In this case, we've got a new socialist government in France, but of course the actions that we're seeing in France are also being mirrored in Greece and to some extent in Italy as well. So as the economic crisis deepens, we're now starting to see governments across Europe adopt extremely hardline policies in taking on migrant groups. We should remember, of course, that many of the migrant groups have been encouraged to move by virtue of the fact that the European Union has actively worked to take down national borders and open free and provide free border controls, which have allowed people to move from country to country in the first place. Could it be that having implemented that policy, the crackdown that we're now starting to see is designed to help a divide and rule policy? So I think that viewers should certainly be keeping their eye on the more important things in Europe, which is that in many countries we're seeing this very harsh behaviour either against rioters or migrants.
Well, in fact, we know that Monsieur Hollande, if we want to pronounce his name, is also taking it out on British in particular with his new tax proposals for foreign-owned property. Yeah. And since the British are the sort of main driver have been for buying up foreign buying up French property, he's intending to double council tax and also double any tax from earnings that are made if you rent your property out in France. Right. So it's not just illegal migrants that he's targeting. He's targeting anybody that isn't French, basically. Right. Yeah. So we've got this interesting situation at the moment that David Cameron has locked us into a 50-year defence agreement, a defence partnership with the French. We've got the fact that the two nations are being forced together, and yet in France at the moment we've now got a policy which is actively hostile to British people living in France. Yeah, right. That seems to be what's happening.
Okay, well, so we should look at that in more detail in due course. Now, I'd just like to move on to a story here which is looking at justice, or probably the lack of justice in Britain today. And this is the story about a police officer, PC David Price, who was recently convicted for growing cannabis in the loft. PC Price, part of the Metropolitan Police, and of course at the moment we know that many, if not all of the police forces across the country at the moment have people who've been convicted of offences. So we've got police officers with criminal records, but this case is particularly interesting because of the action that the lady judge took, and I've got a picture of her here. This is Judge Carol Hagan. And if we just take a look at what she had to say during the case about the police officer himself. Your personal qualities shine through in the references I read. It's obvious that you are an excellent and deeply committed father to your children. The fact that a serving police officer was involved in criminal behaviour must be reflected in the sentence I pass. Now, the UK column team are particularly puzzled as to why the police officer's performance as a father for his children should figure in this court case, which is simply about growing cannabis, an illegal substance. And it's interesting to see here, if I just put the sentence up on screen, that this lady judge has given the police officer a 16-week prison sentence, but which he is then suspended, ordered him to pay 200 hours of unpaid work, and told to pay the £1,500 I beg your pardon, the £1,500 prosecution costs. So we have a summing up of the case where it's important whether this man was good to his children or not. We flag up the fact that he's a serving police officer, and therefore that should be taken into account with the sentencing. And I would have thought the most ordinary people would have then expected a harsh sentence to be passed on this gentleman, because indeed he was a police officer. But if we actually analyse this against the case of two other people, we've recently had an ex-Royal Marine, the gentleman on the left, obviously, Mick Harvey. Mick has spent 17 years in the Royal Marines. He served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan and Bosnia, and he was sentenced to 8 weeks in prison, which he's now currently serving that time inside a prison, and his crime was to try and give his two sons a birthday card and a present and 2 chocolate Easter eggs. On the right, of course, we've got the chairman of the British Constitution Group, Mr. Roger Hayes, who was sentenced to 21 days in prison and served time in prison for withholding his council tax on the basis that the council tax was being used for unlawful purposes, and indeed was being taken from him unlawfully in the first place. So, of course, in the mainstream press, the story about Judge Carol Hagan and her findings over the police officer and the cannabis is put across almost as though it's a joke. It's there as a little bit of titivation for readers. But if we look into this in a deeper and more serious capacity, we can see that actually what has started to happen inside the courts is not only ridiculous, that people who should be given stiff sentences are being let off, whether this is to do with sex offenders or whether it's to do with drugs. And we are then seeing other people who've committed minor offences are being given harsh prison sentences. Now, the UK column Live's comment on this is that this is not accidental, this is not incompetence, this is not madness. What we're actually witnessing is a deliberate collapse of the justice system, because if you want to drag down society as a whole and undermine society, one of the key ways to do it is to introduce inconsistent justice. And we will continue to press with viewers that you should look into Saul Alinsky tactics, where he is saying that if we can divide and rule and introduce uncertainty into democracy, we can start to break down law and order. So we've flagged up this particular case on the basis that there are much deeper issues here than simply a policeman who's been given a very light sentence. And I think it's worth adding that Judge Carol Hagan is known for other cases where she's passed very strange sentences. One of them was on a prolific burglar, Jason Reed, 39, who she spared immediate jail and opted to give him a suspended prison term. What he then did was to carry out another 22 break-ins. So a key question we should perhaps ask ourselves is, how does a judge like Carol Hagan get in post? Who is actually monitoring her? And what is her true objective? Are we simply seeing what many might regard to be incompetence, or are we actually starting to see the judiciary carry out a rather more devious political policy? I'm just going to move on. Favourite topic really, which is the BBC. This is an article from the Mail Online, which is highlighting the fact that after a rush of golds for the British team in the Olympics, BBC chiefs have warned staff not to be too patriotic. And the key part about this is that Mark Thompson, the Director General from the BBC, has actually chastised his staff for getting too excited and too positive and too vocal over the success of the British team. And it would appear that he's taken note of what some foreign journalists have had to say. So one lady that's actually quoted in relation to this saga is a lady called Catherine Mayer. And she says that basically American colleagues are very puzzled by what the BBC have been doing in getting excited about the home team. And she says, and they call Americans jingoistic and sentimental. US journalists would never openly root for the home team. Well, UK Column Live would like to say, and this is perhaps unusual, we would like to say well done the BBC team for actually supporting Britain and the British athletes for a change. And we'd just like to put up a photograph of the two key BBC executives that are the ones speaking out. So we've got here Director General Mark Thompson. He believes his team should be chastised for daring to be patriotic, and of course the lady doing his bidding is the director of BBC News, Helen Bowden. So perhaps viewers might like to keep their attention focused on the fact that the BBC is now openly admitting, as far as its top level policy is concerned, we shouldn't dare to be British or to be excited by the fact that our British Olympic athletes are doing well. Okay, what have you got, Mike?
Well, we're going to discuss Barclays.
I could discuss Barclays. We're going to do a little bit on Standard and Chartered.
Okay, well,
I think actually.
Do Standard and Chartered. Here's the man himself, the chief executive of Standard and Chartered Bank, and his name is Peter Sands. And basically, he is a bit cross at the moment, shall we say, over what's been going on with Standard Chartered. I mean, we haven't really mentioned this so far. I mean, this has been going on for a few days now, but basically, what's pretty clear now is that just to remind everybody that this bank has been accused of laundering money for Iran, and yet another banking scandal. But Standard Chartered absolutely denies that they have been laundering money. That they say that they had, I think it was about 1.5 million transactions, and I think they found about 300 or something which had slipped through the net. Now, a number of MPs have said that this attack by the American regulators on Standard Chartered is in fact an American attack on the City of London. Mervyn King came out yesterday and said that this was not an attack on the city, but he did say that one regulator, but not others, have gone public while an investigation is still going on. So he is singling out the American authorities for making this public at this time. And so you've got to ask the question, just with the LIBOR scandal, but why are they doing this at this time? And I would just highlight the fact that the LIBOR scandal pretty much got rid of Paul Tucker, who's the deputy governor, as a candidate for the governorship of the Bank of England, which is coming up very soon. And this has pretty much destroyed yet another of the candidates, who was Peter Sands. He was a top potential candidate for governorship of the Bank of England. So this, to me, looks like part of the faction fight within the City of London over Glass-Steagall policy, whether they're going to implement Glass-Steagall or not. And obviously, the question is, who is going to be the governor of the Bank of England, and are they going to be pro or anti Glass-Steagall as a policy going forward, if I'm allowed to say that. So I think that's what's behind the Standard Chartered thing. I think it's a non-story, really, in the sense that if they committed any any breach of the regulations. It was a pretty minor breach. It's because it was Iran. It's being pushed up out of proportion, and it's being used to discredit the chief executive Peter Sands in an effort to get him out of the running for the governorship of the Bank of England.
Yeah, I think the thing that interests me over this subject is at the moment, if we look at the banks and the banking industry, we're seeing story after story which is pointing out irregularities. We got the libel scandal. We see criminal activity in the banks, whether it's selling of policies or it's trading or it's getting involved with coups overseas. If we particularly go back a few years, 10 years, and we actually start to trawl through what stories have broken surface over the banking industry, we are seeing a cesspit really of fraud and corruption.
Yeah, but this cesspit has always existed. It's always been there. The question is, why are they making a big deal about it in the mainstream media now? Why now? Because nothing's changed. Right.
Well, there's two issues here. Why are they making an issue? Why are they actually making an issue of it now? And the fact that at the moment we are here as the general public. We're just having to endure this. We're not seeing David Cameron and the government actually stepping in to crack down on the banks. We're not seeing bankers being arrested. We're not seeing the serious fraud squad getting in to the banks and starting to really pull things apart. We've just shown a policeman who's given a community sentence. We're showing other people who are being locked up in prison for giving chocolate Easter eggs, but it appears to be that if you're a banker, nobody's actually going to take you on.
Yeah.
Perhaps that leads into Marcus Agius, does it? We'll just bring him up on screen.
Sorry.
This is the gentleman here. So Marcus Agius, a man of great interest as chairman of Barclays, and of course the UK column team flagged him up a few weeks ago of being of great interest because this is the banker who was selected to be advising the BBC on their policy. So we've got a very interesting situation where we've got the BBC swallowing up whatever it is, £3 billion of taxpayers' money. It's got its own private global TV empire on the side, and then who are the people that the BBC are bringing in to advise the BBC Trust on their programme making, but Marcus Agius. And it was interesting that he was being paid £47,000 by the BBC for 28 days work in the year. And what's just emerged, now that we know he's going to be replaced, is it would appear that he's been earning at least £750,000 for 4 days work a week from Barclays. Yeah. So I'll just recap on that so that viewers don't miss the figures. This gentleman, who the BBC thinks is the quality of man to advise the BBC on programming, the BBC uses licence payers' money to pay this gentleman £47,000 for 28 days work on behalf of the BBC. And while he was doing that, it appears that he would have been earning circa £750,000 as chairman of Barclays.
Yeah, plus bonuses. Remember, that's his basic salary. So it's plus bonuses and plus pension.
Yeah.
So that's not his package. That's his salary.
Okay. Well, we just point out to people that if you're watching UK Live today, I can assure you that none of us are on that sort of pay scale here, or indeed we don't have the £3 billion budget to operate from. So Marcus Agius, though, is on his way out, and the person replacing him is Sir David Walker. Should be able to show a picture here. And this gentleman is, in my opinion, very interesting because if we start to have a little look into his background, he is absolutely a member of the Old Boy Banking Club. Mm-hmm. So he's been involved with the Bank of England, he's been involved with Morgan Stanley, or JP Morgan Stanley. So here is a man totally in the middle of the banking club, and yet he's being brought forward as the chairman to sort out a bank that's obviously been involved in fiddling, I think is the correct expression.
Well, I mean, the other point about that man is he has been part of the regulatory establishment for he worked for the FSA, he's advised the FSA. So we've got Barclays, which was the centre of one of the biggest scandals for years, and they're bringing a man here who in the past was responsible for making sure that these kind of scandals didn't happen. Well, he failed miserably at that job, so they're putting him straight into Barclays, and you got to ask the question, is that because he understands the regulatory framework well enough that he can advise Barclays how to avoid getting caught in the future? Well, that's just a throwaway comment, but
The other thing which I think is of interest with these people is we're seeing them drift in and out of the commercial banking sector and the treasury. We're very often seeing in people's CVs that they're in the private sector 1 minute and then they're back into the...
well, not so much back into the Treasury, but certainly into the FSA and certainly into the Bank of England. But remember, the Bank of England is a commercial institution. It's not a government institution, and the FSA is a non-government organisation. So both of those are not actually public sector roles, either of them. So I don't what it demonstrates, I think, is the true nature of the financial system and the regulators.
Right. So if we said to viewers today, who should we be pointing a finger at to really grip this and go for it? Is this David Cameron's role? Is it the British government that should be taking on these people? Or is it the case that the City of London is actually running the British government?
Well, it is absolutely the case that the City of London is running the British government, and it should be the other way around, of course.
Yeah. Right. So that gives us something to aim at, I think.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've got some information on trade deficits and economy and food. So
right. Well, so I mean, the UK trade, I think yesterday they announced that the UK trade deficit is at a 15-year high. So that means that the value of imports as opposed to exports, the value of imports is hugely higher than the value of exports. In other words, our manufacturing base has collapsed yet again, a bit further this time. So this was being blamed on the Diamond Jubilee celebrations, as the media attempts to do with every piece of bad economic news. Well, it's the rain, or it's the holidays, or it's something like that. It's not. It's our fundamental economy that's in a state of collapse. Now, unfortunately for the BBC, they didn't quite get away with it this time, because Vicky Redwood, who was an analyst at Capital, who's an analyst at Capital Economics, said, made the point, if the bank holiday halted work at ports, it would affect both imports and exports. The previous extra bank holidays have not had a big impact on the overall deficit. So she's highlighting the fact that this notion that the deficit, our trade deficit, has got anything to do whatsoever with holidays or
well, just forgive me on this, Mike, but we've had bank holidays for a number of years.
Yes, but we had extra bank holidays because of we had a couple of extra days, and this couple of extra days apparently caused this massive deficit in our balance of trade. So I mean, to come back to your point a second ago, George Osborne and David Cameron are the guys that are responsible for this. Their policy is destroying British capability to produce, and it's a policy that needs to change.
Well, perhaps it's David Cameron and George Osborne that need to be changed to change the policy.
Yeah, fair enough, but we know that the alternatives will maintain the policy, so the policy has to change as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And the BBC, has Peston had anything to say on this?
I think Peston's on holiday, because I haven't seen much of him in the last few weeks.
Been very quiet. Yeah. But going back, if I think back a few years, I remember the balance of payments was a regular feature of BBC News, or the evening news, and of course we were constantly told whether the country was in the black or in the red. It's been very noticeable over certainly the last 5 years, I would say, that all of a sudden this detailed information about what's happening in the economy is gone.
Well, quite a lot of detailed information has been set aside, particularly with regard to money supply and various other sort of key measures that just aren't shown anymore.
Right. So we've got 5 minutes to go.
Well, we're in trouble then. Well, basically, the next thing is drought, really, because our food supply is going to be a major problem. We've got now 2/3 of the United States is in drought, and this is not just a minor drought. We're talking about actual shortages in drinking water. We've got a drinking water crisis in the Midwest. Also, northern Mexico and Texas are in trouble. But obviously, the drought is destroying crops, and I think I'll just put it on the screen behind. We've got this is a typical maize field in the United States, and that should be 6 or 10 feet high by now. As a result, we've got 44 U.S. counties on Wednesday were added to the list that are considered agricultural disasters, which brings the total to 1,628 out of 3,000 United States counties are now considered to be agricultural disasters. We've got the same situation happening in Russia, where they've taken in their harvest already because if they had left it in the ground, it was going to be destroyed. We've got floods in other parts of the world which are destroying crops there. As a result, this week we've got corn prices up 23%. We've got food prices generally right across the board up 6% already. And just to give an impression, Mexico has increased its requirement for imported corn by 76%, and you've got to ask the question, where's it going to come from?
Yeah.
And this, the fact of the matter is, if we've got problems with the weather, which we have, however that's happened, our infrastructure should be capable of coping with that from year to year, and it just does seem ridiculous in the 21st century that we don't have any kind of resilience in our food supply at all.
Of course, British farming industry has effectively been destroyed over a number of years, as has the fishing industry. So we're now at a position where Britain, as previously an abundant producer, is now very vulnerable to what's happening in the world food markets. Something you told us about a while ago was the fact that hedge funds were actually buying up, taking delivery of food commodities.
Well, that's still going on.
Right.
I don't know that it's increased in scale beyond much where it was a year ago, but certainly yes, they are buying up commodities and stockpiling them in the hope that they can manipulate the price. I don't think that this price change is a result of that. This is a genuine shortage in global food supply, and of course it's going to hit third world countries first, and they're going to suffer pretty badly as a result of this. But all of us in this time of austerity are going to suffer because our food prices are going to go up, and this won't be reflected in the inflation figures because those are fiddled basically. But we will for our basic necessities of life are going to see inflation creeping in the next period of time.
Well, the other thing is that we know under the drive for a single world government, which of course we have a British parliamentary group who are pushing for a one world government, but interdependence of countries is a key factor under that each country must be dependent on another country.
Right, so that came out of the Lima Declaration, United Nations Declaration a lot of years ago. We have covered it in the past in the newspaper, where they made a policy decision in the United Nations that countries must be interdependent and not independent.
Yeah.
So, but this leads on to the situation in Spain, because as we know, in the past period of time we've had quite a lot of civil disturbance in Spain. This week has seen something which incredibly has been utterly unreported in the mainstream media in this country, but really gave Spain a shock by all accounts, and that is that a Spanish union, the Andaluz Workers' Union, ran 2 raids on supermarkets where basically they got a couple of dozen people in each case, and in both cases the people that actually invaded the supermarkets included a Lord Mayor, and I have a picture of them here. And basically they went round and sacked the bit like a medieval sacking of a grain store or something, but they went into the supermarkets and effectively stole trolley loads of food, and they then donated those to local charities and food banks.
Yeah.
Now, why on earth are they doing this? Well, the fact of the matter is that in Spain, we now have 17% of Spanish children below the poverty line, and that's not that they don't have iPods or televisions. This is, according to Action Against Hunger, 25% of Spanish children are now malnourished.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is in Spain. So one of these raids on the supermarkets happened in Cadiz, and they have 40% of the population of Cadiz is currently unemployed. 40%. The situation in Spain is getting out of control. You know, we were talking about psychopaths and psychopathic behaviour yesterday. It is the policy of European leaders that these people are suffering, because they could change this situation overnight.
Well, of course, the whole. If we just stick with the subject of the European project, everything that's happened is happening following on the desire to get one supranational state and also one system under the euro. I think we can steal a few more minutes, because this is
I'm
very
just going to mention
subject.
that because Tony Blair gave an interview with Die Zeit in Germany yesterday, I think it was, where he was basically saying exactly that. The euro crisis is designed. He's more or less saying that the euro crisis is designed to usher in, you know, full EU fiscal and federal union. I'm just going to read a quote here, which you might like to comment on. But he basically said, if more competences are transferred to the EU, then its democratic legitimacy must be built up too, and Britain must play a strong role in this, because we need a balance between European institutions and the nation states. If this is done wrongly, we could create a political crisis that could become just as big as the euro crisis. People will not go along with the abolishment of the nation state. And what he seems to be recognizing, that the peoples in Europe are not prepared to see their nation states disappear. And he's basically giving the European elites, his new elite in Europe, a warning that they need to be very careful about how they use the euro crisis to usher in this full European federal Europe, that they've got to basically build up democratic institutions which they can then sell. That's my reading of it. But you know, he's recognizing that and I remember a speech he gave, I think just when he was retiring, saying that the Westphalian notion of the nation state was out of date, that it was gone. Now he seems to be recognizing that actually, well, he might have thought it was gone, but most people don't.
Yeah. Well, it's I think it's a very frightening prospect that we've got a politician with a track record of Tony Blair who's sticking his nose into what's going on in Europe. He's been peace envoy to the Middle East for quite a considerable period of time, and we don't see any sign of success there. What we see in Europe at the moment is trouble, and Mr. Blair is in the background with a finger in the pie, I think, is the answer to it. But the subject of, have you got more to add on that?
No, I'm done. That's
okay. And the subject of food and hunger is a very important one, because one of the other articles we picked out of the news, this was reported in the Guardian, was that on Sunday Mr. Cameron is going to host a hunger summit, and he's taking some of the gold medalists along, some of the Olympic athletes. And the subject is to raise the plight of malnourished children. I find some of these things almost difficult to comment on, because the hypocrisy from Mr. Cameron is just, it's mind-blowing, really. We've got a man who's just spent 9.2 billion on building the whole of the Olympic facilities. This is why we know that if we just take London, as a city, poverty in London at extraordinary levels, people sleeping on the streets, ex-servicemen with nowhere to stay. We're seeing cutbacks to the NHS. We're seeing all of these things happen. And what does he do? He spends 9.2 billion on the Olympics, and then he uses that to say that he's actually going to help malnourished children. But if we analyse why a lot of the children, particularly in Africa, why they're malnourished, we can see that there have been policies introduced by the international banks and monetary system which has deliberately stripped away the ability of African nations to feed themselves. So we're taking away crops for them in order to support cheap prices by the mainstream supermarkets. And here is Mr. Blair, well, I'm going to solve the problem and have a summit on malnourished children.
I wonder, is he going to be speaking about Spain, as Mr. Cameron?
Well, I shouldn't think so. I shouldn't think he's going to talk about anything which has got any qualification, because either this man is not bright enough to understand what's really going on in the world, or else he knows exactly and he's simply doing the bidding. Yeah. But one thing for certain, I don't think that we're going to see Mr. Cameron going hungry over the next few weeks.
Be interested to find out what he's eating while he's there.
Well, perhaps he should have a chat with Eric Pickles, Conservative heavyweight. Okay, well, on that note, some very serious things happening. If you're thinking, what can we do about it? The answer is always the same. Talk to your friends, get the information out, research, challenge your MPs and local civil servants. Don't let them get away with it. Don't give your consent. And please will you pass on the details of UK Column Live. The more people we inform, the better it is. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.